Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster, Joanna Jarjue, and political commentator, Benedict Spence. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Let's start with the Sunday Times. It leads with that poll which says the Conservatives could win fewer than 100 seats in the general election, while Labour are on course to top 450 seats. Still on the election, the Telegraph carries claims from the Energy Secretary that Labour's pledge to convert Britain to clean power by 2030 would leave the country at the mercy of China to supply the necessary materials and equipment. Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, is under fresh fire in the Mail, accused by a former public standards chief of hypocrisy over her dealings in the property market. That's after comments that she made about the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's wife. The Observer has obtained a leaked recording, which it says shows that the British government has been given legal advice that Israel is breaking humanitarian law in Gaza, but has failed to make it public. The Express claims an exclusive with news that a new drug to prevent dementia is being developed, and subject to trials, it could be available within 5 years. The People focuses on the progress of 9-year-old double amputee Tony Hudgell, who's learning to walk unaided again after his operation and has so far raised £2 million for charity. The Mirror has been speaking to I'm a Celebrity winner, Giovanna Fletcher, who praises her friend, the Princess of Wales, for the way that she's dealing with her cancer diagnosis. And finally, The Star leads with news of a boom in the number of people advertising for exorcists. Sort of Easter story, kind of. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the program, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. Well, as I mentioned, we're joined tonight by the broadcaster, Joanna Jarjue, and political commentator, Benedict Spence. Thank you so much for coming in. It's great to see you. Let's start with that story in the Sunday Times. Let's get the front page now. The Tories may be left with fewer than 100 MPs. That's this new poll that's coming out of 15,000 voters. So not only fewer than 100 MPs, but Rishi Sunak could even lose his seat. Benedict, what do you make of this?
The number, in fact, that it gives is 98, which is indeed just under 100. But that's in case people wanted to know exactly what we're going to be left with. It's 98 Tory MPs all merrily huddled together in the House of Commons, not even really able to put up much of an opposition, if we're a bit honest. But yes, it's... I don't want to say it should be ringing alarm bells for the government, because there should have been alarm bells ringing for the last couple of years. But as you say, Rishi Sunak is potentially at risk. His largest challenger, were there to be a leadership challenge, is probably Penny Mordaunt. She also is at risk of losing her seat. In fact, there is some suggestion that the best chances of her actually retaining her seat would be to challenge Rishi Sunak and to beat him in a leadership contest, which doesn't bode particularly well. But that is what we're all going to be talking about now for the next couple of weeks, is whether or not the Tories should have another leadership contest. And I know a lot of people sit there and they say, well, it would be suicide because they've had so many and there's been so much turmoil and people wouldn't forgive them. But I really do think actually the party is probably sitting there looking at the polling and weighing up the pros and cons and thinking, look, actually, would it really hurt us that badly to have another leadership contest, given that we are polling so badly currently? This would be a historic wipeout, I think the largest in well over a century at least. It would be a significantly larger swing towards Labour than Blair's victory in 97. That's how bad things have got. And the thing is, for everybody saying you can't have a leadership contest now, where is the inspiration coming from Sunak? I don't see it.
I'm not sure that the great British public actually have the appetite for another Tory leadership contest. I think that we're quite sick, to be honest, of them kind of just churning out another one and another one that doesn't actually change anything. In fact, it seems to be getting worse. You know, when I looked at this and when I look at recent polls, I almost question whether the Tories will even be the opposition party, never mind if they'll actually get into government next time. Obviously, you know, they're being challenged quite significantly by the Reform Party. And even with those polls with the Reform Party, I don't think it will be as worse of a Tory defeat when it comes to them, because I think a lot of people will end up tactical voting. So the Tories might not do as bad as expected, but I do think that it will be a historic defeat and they'll be at the other side of the fence that Labour was in the last election, particularly with the red wall seats.
Just to point to you, Benedict, I suppose some of the names that we see there that might try to unseat Rishi Sunak are also under threat of losing their seats. So they really have nothing to lose.
Well, that's partly why I think that, it's like sort of rats attempting to flee a sinking ship. Ultimately, there are going to be a lot of people. A lot of Tory MPs are standing down at this general election. They've decided, you know what, the game's up. We might as well do it now. But there are some who still have serious ambitions. I mean, that's why people become Tory MPs, is because they all think they can become Prime Minister. So you're right, actually, this is it's a now or never moment for a lot of them, having missed so many previous opportunities, I think, to do so. But I actually think, Joanna, she's not wrong when she says it's not necessarily going to be so bad that people might actually get into the voting booth and go, do you know what, I'm not going to vote Reform, I am going to vote Conservative. Or a lot of people will go, do you know what, I can't stand the idea of Keir Starmer, I'm not going to vote Labour. So the thing is, I don't think that there is any chance that they could win the general election, but I really do think that they could stem a lot of the bleeding. The problem is, with Sunak in charge, there's no real desire to stem the bleeding. It just feels, I think it was Ben Wallace, that was who it was, who says, we can't change our leader, we have to walk towards the gunfire. And you think, well, what on earth kind of message is that, accepting defeat like that?
Let's just take a look at another story, front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Labour net zero plan puts UK at China's mercy, and this is about the 2030 clean power target that Keir Starmer has. And it's just a reminder that actually, as we're having all this internal political turmoil and an election coming up, there's serious threats from outside.
Yes, there is. And to be honest, when it comes to net zero, the Conservatives aren't necessarily the people that put themselves, at the forefront of that. They've changed plans and moved the targets time and time and again. But I think this whole thing about being reliant on China, I think whichever way we play it, we're always going to be reliant on China to an extent, even when it comes to things like wind turbines, the actual materials that we use from that. Obviously, I think after the pandemic, a lot of lessons have been made in terms of energy reliance when it comes to Russia. But I think that, later on, and when we're thinking long-term for net zero, we haven't done the groundwork. And I think that that's the problem mostly with the country in terms of just forward planning when it comes to energy.
I think it's incredibly rich of the Conservatives to be saying that Labour's plan will put us at the mercy of China. For what it's worth, I do think that going faster than we necessarily should would do that by necessity, because, as you say, China is very deeply involved in those markets. It's done that very deliberately. But let us not forget, who it was that welcomed Xi Jinping to the UK because said that, Britain is open for business? Oh, that was David Cameron. Which government was it that said, oh, we don't need to build our own nuclear power stations? They're not going to come online until 2022. Whoops, that was the coalition government. So for them to sort of turn around and say, well, if you vote for Labour, that'll, endanger us to exposure to Chinese companies and the Chinese government. Well, we're kind of through the looking glass at that on that particular topic, I think.
OK. Let's go to The Observer, front page again. UK given legal advice that Israel is flouting international and humanitarian law in Gaza. This coming from a top Conservative. This story coming out the day after. Again, we have seen thousands of people on the streets of London. Tell us more about the story, Joanna.
They're basically saying that the legal advice that's been given behind the scenes to the UK government has been suggesting that Israel haven't necessarily been following international law. Obviously, publicly, when the UK government are speaking about the Israel and Gaza conflict, they, have a hard kind of stance in terms of supporting Israel and, similar to supporting Israel. We've seen different things when it comes to David Cameron, more publicly recently, kind of retracting his support for Israel. But this will be a big problem for the Conservative Party because, the UK have also been supplying arms to Israel, and that has been an issue when it comes to public support.
Benedict, before I come to you, let me just get a reply from the FCDO's spokesperson. This is what they've said. They say, we keep advice on Israel's adherence to international humanitarian law under review, and ministers act in accordance with that advice. For example, when considering export licenses. The content of the government's advice is confidential, so that the official reply. What do you make of the whole story, including the reply?
Well, that's the key thing I was going to say. That there is no sort of legal precedent for the government actually having to reveal this information. And this is a Conservative MP, Alicia Kearns, saying actually that the government should come clean. But the government is under no legal obligation to come clean. It's a very tricky situation, though, for the UK government, having been so sort of staunch and steadfast in its support of Israel up to this point, it makes it very difficult diplomatically to sort of row back and go, oh, OK, now you have to change tack because, pressure is being put on us by our own MPs. But also, we just have to look at the broader picture. Whether or not Israel has broken international humanitarian law, Israel is the UK's strongest ally in the region. It is always going to be, the UK and Israel are always going to have a very strong relationship because of the nature of the region and because of the nature of the relationship between the United Kingdom, the United States and Israel. And the final thing to remember is, of course, Israel doesn't necessarily care what the British government tells it. The whole point of the reason why Israel exists is so that Jewish people who choose to live in Israel are not beholden to what other governments say. So it's a tricky one where, and I think we saw this actually with Keir Starmer, sort of being very sort of hesitant to criticise the government, even though he does not like Benjamin Netanyahu. He's no fan of the current setup in Israel, but he would have to be the one in the event of a general election who'd have to pick up the phone and explain decisions to the Israeli government. For as long as the Israelis are our allies, and that's not going to change, they have to tread a very delicate diplomatic line in terms of the criticism that they can actually level.
The problem is, and what I worry about this conflict and the UK's involvement is that how history will look at the country. So we're at danger, basically, of being looked at as if we're being complicit when it comes to certain things, especially when we're not being forthcoming about certain bits of information. We've seen the protests, on London streets. It's vast. It's a massive divide, as we've seen even tonight. And I think that this puts a lot more pressure on the government, and they should be forthcoming. I think David Cameron, actually, as Foreign Secretary, has surprised me, to be honest, in terms of how he's approached this. Obviously, he came in quite, coy and quite kind of neutral to begin with. But I think sometimes, as things has kind of developed, especially with the things that the UN are saying about potential war crimes by Israel, it becomes more and more difficult for the UK government to be able to defend this. And if we find that they're not being forthcoming about legal advice, that puts even more pressure on them.
Joanna Benedict, we'll leave it there for now. But coming up, this story in the Sunday Express. Are we on the brink of getting a drug that could prevent the scourge of dementia? Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, the broadcaster Joanna Jarjue and political commentator Benedict Spence. OK, let's take a look at more of the front pages. The Mail on Sunday, their headline, Rayner attacks hypocrisy over jibe at the PM's wife. A sort of complicated story, sort of, because it's all about accusations of Angela Rayner and her various houses. Benedict, talk us through it.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because for a very long time, the Labour Party, or people in the Labour Party, felt it's quite an easy thing to take pot shots at Rishi Sunak and his wife because of their financial situation. They're incredibly well off compared to the average person. Are they in touch with the people? Are they not? A bit of a cheap shot. But Angela Rayner, because of her situation with her home, is it her primary residence? Is it her secondary residence? Has she avoided paying capital gains tax? Has she broken electoral law? All of this. She's managed to bring down upon herself one of those sort of self-inflicted scandals that doesn't actually seem very large in the sort of the details. But of course, given her prominence within the Labour Party, it is a big deal if you're then sort of accusing your opponents of something similar. And I think on the one hand, it's a headache for Angela Rayner. It's perhaps not so much for Sir Keir Starmer, because he's able to sort of compartmentalise it and put it over there and say, well, that's her issue. And she's been a thorn in his side at some point in the past anyway. But this is one of those things where, as the Labour Party sort of trundles towards power, not really marching, just sort of it's going to end up there whether it wants to or not, these sorts of things are going to come out of the woodwork a lot more. When you're about to become the government, you get a lot more scrutiny, and you're not able to get away with, just sort of, shifting things here or not releasing your tax returns and that sort of thing. Actually, more is expected of you. So if you're then taking pot shots at the other side for being dodgy, that's not going to fly, I don't think.
Well, I actually don't think it's the same at all, because with Angela Rayner, it's between £1,000 to £1,500 in terms of what she could have potentially made from this sale or avoided paying. Whereas with Rishi Sunak's wife, it was things like the non-dom tax status, and that was in the millions. So to even compare the two, I think is completely wrong. I get that also it's the principle, and that counts. But also, Angela Rayner has already gone through a level of investigation. I know that has been reopened. But from her point of view, she's thinking, well, if the police are satisfied, if HMRC is satisfied, then that's all I need to do, because anything further than that could actually be putting her family's business out to the general public.
But here it's saying ex-Commons watchdog demanding a police probe, Benedict.
Yeah, and I think, as I say, I mean, isn't it more the principle that matters? Even though, yeah, OK, the figures, as we say, are minuscule compared to what's going on with the Prime Minister's family. But it is the principle. She sort of set herself up as this character that goes after, other people who perhaps don't pay their taxes or X, Y, Z.
Can I also say it's
Sure.
the second time in 4 days that the Mail on Sunday, or the Mail has led on
this story.
Rayner. Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, it's an excuse and an opportunity for the Conservative Party. It's not often that you get stories like this when it comes to the Labour Party, but with the Conservatives, it's just another Friday, it's just another Tuesday.
Because they've not been in power for so long.
But
That's
it's in
why.
the
They've got to get
millions
used
as
to
well.
it.
And when it comes to Tory sleaze and when it comes to, cronyism that we see from them, it is literally a weekly offence that we see from them. But I think with Angela Rayner, it was 15 years ago. It's a really insignificant amount. And actually, I think that more should be looked into it if the police come with a result that's worthy of further conversation.
OK. We've got 20 seconds, very briefly, or 90 seconds, rather, and a good news story that we can finish the hour with. Front page of the Sunday Express, new wonder jab will prevent dementia, which, if it works, would be amazing. So millions of people could be spared the agony of Alzheimer's thanks to the development of a game-changing vaccine.
Yes, so this is in clinical trials at the moment, and it will be music to a lot of people's ears. A lot of people suffer from dementia in early age or even early dementia, and it affects obviously the individual, but also the families, and people kind of slowly see their family members decline. So I think it'll be welcome news that this is actually starting to get some traction, and people can see some sort of light at the end of the tunnel for this disease.
It really would be a game changer.
And if it's successful, it will. The thing is, we think it'll save people a lot of pain and suffering. It'll also save an awful lot of money, because dementia costs the taxpayer great swathes in terms of the resources that it takes up, taxpayers' money, the NHS, social care. So we need to think about it in those terms. Actually developing these sorts of jabs, it makes people's lives better in terms of they don't suffer so much, but it also frees up resources for other things if it means suddenly those people are no longer priority patients. So again, another net benefit, I suppose.
And it is such a particularly heartbreaking
Yes.
disease for the family as well.